Commander Vex'tar adjusted his ceremonial fear induction cape and surveyed the assembled students of Nebula Academy with the kind of satisfaction normally reserved for serial killers and tax auditors. Today was the day. Today, these young beings would learn what true terror meant, courtesy of the Galactic Education Authority's finest fear specialists. "Behold," Vex'tar announced, his voice dripping with theatrical menace, "the Predator Awareness Protocol. For eons, we have collected the most spine-chilling, sanity-shattering sounds from across the galaxy, sounds that have reduced entire civilizations to quivering, whimpering masses of existential dread." His assistant, Quin'dal, nodded so vigorously his 3 heads nearly gave him whiplash. The poor creature was practically vibrating with excitement, clutching his holographic sound projector like it contained the secrets of the universe, which, in his opinion, it basically did. The student body represented 17 different species, all appropriately cowering in their designated terror-receiving positions. Well, 16 species were cowering. The human in the back row was picking his teeth with what appeared to be a small metal stick and looking about as intimidated as someone watching paint dry in slow motion. "Observe," Vex'tar continued, completely missing this detail, "as we begin with the dreaded howl of Grixnoth, the apex predator of Kepler 442b. This sound has been known to cause spontaneous molting in reptilians and temporary blindness in crystalline beings." The speakers crackled to life with a sound that was supposed to be soul-crushingly terrifying. It was a deep, resonant roar that built to a crescendo of primal fury, complete with what the sound engineers had labeled as the echoes of certain doom. Jake Martinez, the human in question, tilted his head like a confused golden retriever. "That's it?" he called out, somehow managing to sound both bored and mildly disappointed. "Dude, that sounds like my neighbor's garbage disposal when he tries to force a whole turkey down there on Thanksgiving." The classroom fell silent. Even the naturally chittering insectoids stopped their nervous clicking. Commander Vex'tar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sure sign that his superior alien brain was processing information it wasn't quite equipped to handle. "I beg your pardon?" Vex'tar's voice had lost some of its theatrical menace and gained a note of genuine confusion. Jake shrugged, somehow making the gesture look casual, despite being surrounded by the supposed audio equivalent of cosmic horror. "I'm just saying, if you want to hear something actually scary, you should hear what my garbage disposal sounds like when it breaks down at 2 in the morning. Now that's nightmare fuel." Quin'dal leaned over to whisper urgently in his commander's primary ear. "Sir, perhaps the human's auditory receptors are damaged. Should we increase the volume?" "No, no." Vex'tar waved him off, though his confidence was clearly shaken. "Clearly this is just bravado. No being in the galaxy is immune to properly calibrated fear frequencies. We simply need to try harder." The rest of the students watched this exchange with the kind of fascination normally reserved for traffic accidents and reality television shows. The crystalline beings were literally glowing with excitement, while the gaseous entities were practically bouncing in their containment suits. Jake, meanwhile, was now examining his fingernails with the dedication of a forensic scientist. "You know," he said conversationally, "if you really want to scare people, you need to work on your presentation. Maybe some dramatic lighting, better timing. This feels very amateur hour." And that was the moment Commander Vex'tar realized he might have bitten off more than his 3 stomachs could digest. Commander Vex'tar's eye stalks twitched as he processed this unprecedented situation. In his 47 years of fear administration, no being had ever critiqued his terror techniques like a disappointed restaurant reviewer. He consulted his holographic xenobiology chart with the desperate energy of a student cramming for finals. Human, Homo sapiens, originated from Sol 3, classification. His voice trailed off as he reached the planetary classification. Oh dear." "What is it, sir?" Quin'dal asked, though from his tone, he already suspected this wasn't going to be good news. "Death world, Quin'dal. The human comes from a death world. Class 12 hazard rating." Vex'tar's voice had taken on the hollow quality of someone who'd just realized they'd brought a water pistol to a plasma cannon fight. Jake, who had somehow procured a bag of what appeared to be small, crunchy food items, looked up with interest. Oh, you guys have Earth in your database? Cool. Yeah, it's pretty metal. We've got these things called hurricanes that are basically giant sky blenders, and don't even get me started on Australia. The other students were now watching this exchange like it was the most entertaining thing they'd seen since Professor Zelnoth accidentally got stuck in his own temporal loop during advanced physics. Even the usually stoic rock people were leaning forward with interest. Right, Vex'tar said, clearly trying to regain his professional composure. Deathworld inhabitants often have elevated fear thresholds. This is merely a statistical anomaly. We simply need to recalibrate. He gestured dramatically to Quin'dal, who immediately began fiddling with an array of controls that looked like they belonged on the bridge of a starship rather than in a classroom. Behold, human, the shriek of Vex'tar, the shadow predator of the negative zone. This sound exists partially outside our dimensional framework and has been known to cause madness in beings with inadequate mental shielding. The speakers erupted with a sound that could only be described as what you'd get if you fed a banshee nothing but energy drinks and existential dread for 6 months, then asked it to sing opera while being slowly fed through a blender. Jake paused mid-chew and tilted his head again. After a moment, he held up a small scoring card that he'd apparently fashioned out of notebook paper. 4 out of 10. Points for creativity, but it's trying way too hard. Also, that dimensional frequency thing you're doing. It just sounds like when my car speakers blow out because I forgot to turn the bass down. The classroom was now in complete chaos. Half the students were having what appeared to be religious experiences, while the other half were taking notes on Jake's commentary like he was delivering a lecture on advanced acoustic theory. Quin'dal's 3 heads were rotating independently, each wearing a different expression of confusion. Sir, perhaps we should try the whispers of infinite emptiness? The ones that drove the Zen masters of Kepler 452c to abandon their philosophy of inner peace and take up aggressive interpretive dance? By all means, Vex'tar said through gritted teeth, though he was beginning to suspect this was going to end about as well as everything else had so far. Jake finished his snack and crumpled the bag with the casual efficiency of someone who'd clearly done this before. You know what? I'm kind of curious to see where this goes. Hit me with your best shot. And that was when Commander Vex'tar realized he was in a galactic-scale competition with a species that apparently treated fear the way most civilizations treated recreational mathematics. What followed could only be described as the audio-visual equivalent of watching a very dignified alien civilization slowly lose its collective mind. Commander Vex'tar had broken out the heavy artillery, holographic projectors that could simulate the hunting grounds of the galaxy's most notorious predators, complete with full sensory immersion. The classroom now resembled the hellscape of Mordacus Prime, complete with lava flows, acid rain, and the distant sounds of something very large and very angry, hunting something much smaller and significantly more panicked. The other students were appropriately terrified, huddling in their designated safety zones while emanating species-appropriate distress signals. Jake, meanwhile, had somehow procured a tablet and was scrolling through what appeared to be nature documentaries. Okay, see, this is where you guys are going wrong, he said, completely ignoring the fact that holographic death lizards were supposedly hunting him. You're going for quantity over quality. More roaring doesn't equal more scary. He held up his tablet, showing footage of a great white shark breaching the water. Now this is what you call an apex predator. 20 feet of pure muscle, rows of razor-sharp teeth, and it can smell a drop of blood from miles away. But you know what makes it really terrifying? The holographic hellscape flickered as Quin'dal tried to adjust the settings, clearly flustered by Jake's casual disregard for their carefully crafted nightmare scenario. What? He asked despite himself. The music, Jake said with a grin. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. See, we figured out that anticipation is way scarier than the actual thing. You guys are showing all your cards up front. Commander Vex'tar materialized his most impressive holographic predator, a creature that looked like someone had crossed a tiger with a tornado and given it a bad attitude and several extra sets of teeth. Behold the ravenous maw of Zephyria 9. Its roar can shatter molecular bonds. Jake squinted at the creature, then pulled up another video on his tablet. Okay, that's not bad, but check this out. This is what we call a honey badger. It's about the size of a medium dog, And it literally does not care. It will fight anything, up to and including things 50 times its size. We have a saying about them: honey badger don't give a damn. The holographic super predator roared with the fury of collapsed stars. Jake held up his tablet speaker next to his mouth and made a small, unimpressed huffing sound. That's the noise the honey badger makes when it's annoyed, which is always. By this point, the other students had forgotten to be terrified and were watching Jake's impromptu nature documentary with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for revolutionary scientific discoveries. Even the hive mind entities had synchronized their attention to his presentation. And then, Jake continued, warming to his theme, there are humans. We looked at a world full of things trying to kill us and decided to domesticate some of them, eat others, and turn the rest into entertainment. You want to know what we do for fun? We strap ourselves to giant metal death machines and hurl ourselves down mountains. We call it skiing, and we pay money for the privilege. Vex'tar's eye stalks were now rotating in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to track Jake's logic. But surely you must fear something. Every species has primal terror responses. It's a universal survival mechanism. Jake grinned, and for the first time there was something in his expression that made even the holographic predators seem to take a step back. Oh, we fear plenty of things. We just got really creative about it. Commander Vex'tar's pride could only take so much. Here he was, a certified terror professional with multiple degrees in applied frightfulness and a minor in existential dread studies, being shown up by what appeared to be a barely evolved mammal from a backwater death world. This would not stand. Very well, human, he said, drawing himself up to his full height and activating his most intimidating posture protocols. If you find our carefully curated collection of galactic terror so amusing, perhaps you would care to demonstrate what passes for frightening on your primitive world. The classroom fell silent, except for the soft humming of life support systems and what sounded like someone's digestive tract processing lunch with more enthusiasm than was strictly necessary. Jake's grin widened in a way that made several students unconsciously scoot their chairs back. Oh, you want me to scare you guys? This should be fun. Jake stood up, cracked his knuckles in a way that somehow managed to sound ominous, and began pacing in front of the class like a professor about to deliver the lecture that would haunt his students' dreams for decades. See, the thing about humans is that we've had thousands of years to perfect the art of scaring ourselves. We've turned terror into entertainment, fear into profit, and psychological trauma into date-night activities. Where do I even begin? He paused for dramatic effect, a technique that Commander Vex'tar grudgingly had to admit was quite effective. Let's start simple. Jump scares. The basic principle is that you make people feel safe and comfortable, then, bam! He slapped his hands together suddenly, causing half the class to levitate briefly and one of the gaseous entities to accidentally compress into a solid state. Sorry, Zephyr, Jake said to the temporarily crystallized gas being. That's kind of the point, though. We figured out that anticipation plus surprise equals maximum fear response. But that's amateur stuff. You want to see real psychological horror? Quin'dal, who had been taking notes with the dedication of a graduate student, looked up eagerly. Yes! Show us your advanced terror techniques. Jake's expression took on the satisfied look of someone about to drop knowledge like it was a precision-guided munition. Okay, picture this scenario. You wake up in the morning and check your bank account on your phone, but there's no money left because you forgot you set up automatic payments for 17 different streaming services you signed up for during a 3-day period when you were bored and slightly drunk. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet usually associated with deep space, or the moment before someone realizes they've made a terrible mistake. Commander Vex'tar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, then all at once, then seemed to lose focus entirely. That's, he began, then stopped. But that's not predation-based fear. That's existential economic dread. Exactly. Jake beamed like a proud teacher whose student had just grasped a particularly complex concept. We don't just fear things with teeth and claws. We fear running late, social embarrassment, checking our browser history in public, and the possibility that everyone at the party is talking about us when we go to the bathroom. The rock people began making low, rumbling sounds that their species produced when experiencing profound philosophical confusion. The hive-mind entities were broadcasting so much bewilderment that several students had to put on psychic dampening headphones. Jake was just getting warmed up. And then there's our horror entertainment industry. We literally pay money to watch other people get murdered by supernatural entities while eating overpriced snacks. We created haunted houses where the whole point is to walk through dark corridors while strangers in masks jump out and scream at us. For fun. Commander Vex'tar sat down heavily in the nearest chair, which happened to be designed for a completely different species, and left him looking like a very confused pretzel. Jake was on a roll now, and watching a room full of supposedly advanced alien beings struggle to comprehend human psychology was apparently better than whatever he'd been planning to do with his afternoon anyway. He pulled up his tablet again, this time scrolling to what appeared to be a list. You want to know the really messed up part? We categorize our fear entertainment, horror movies, thriller novels, escape rooms, extreme sports, haunted attractions, ghost tours, and my personal favorite, competitive scary storytelling around campfires while sitting in the dark wilderness surrounded by actual predators. Quin'dal's middle head was now spinning slowly while his other two heads maintained eye contact, creating an effect that was both unsettling and oddly hypnotic. You willingly seek out fear-inducing experiences for recreational purposes? Oh, it gets better, Jake said with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found their calling. We have entire genres dedicated to specific types of terror. Psychological horror, body horror, cosmic horror, slasher films, zombie apocalypse scenarios, alien invasion stories, and something we call found footage, where we pretend to accidentally film ourselves being murdered. Commander Vex'tar made a sound that could best be described as what would happen if confusion became sentient and tried to communicate through interpretive whimpering. But why? Why would an evolved species deliberately induce fear states in themselves? Jake paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. You know what? That's actually a really good question. I think it's because we're the only species crazy enough to figure out that controlled fear is kind of like emotional exercise. It gets your heart pumping, makes you feel alive, and afterwards you get this amazing rush of relief that you survived. He pulled up another video on his tablet, this one showing people voluntarily throwing themselves off bridges with only elastic cords to prevent their deaths. We call this bungee jumping. The whole point is to experience what it feels like to die, but safely. We've weaponized our own survival instincts and turned them into entertainment. The classroom had transcended confusion and entered what could only be described as a state of collective existential crisis. Several students were openly staring at Jake like he'd just announced that humans also breathe liquid fire and ate dark matter for breakfast. And then, Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the psychological breakdown he was causing, there are extreme sports. We take activities that should be safe and fun, then add speed, height, or the possibility of serious injury. Skateboarding, but down a mountain. Swimming, but with sharks. Flying, but you jump out of the aircraft on purpose. One of the crystalline beings began emitting a high-pitched frequency that roughly translated to "does not compute," repeated several thousand times per second. The best part, Jake said, his grin now reaching levels that could probably be classified as a hazardous material, is that we've turned fear into a multi-billion credit industry. People plan vacations around being scared. We have theme parks dedicated to terror, hotels that advertise their ghost populations, and tours of places where horrible things happened to previous tourists. Commander Vex'tar buried all four of his faces in his tentacles. I need to file a report about this species immediately. 3 hours later, Commander Vex'tar was still staring at his official incident report with the kind of shell-shocked expression usually reserved for soldiers who'd seen too much combat and tax auditors who'd spent too much time reviewing creative accounting practices. Subject: Human Psychological Assessment Results, he dictated to his voice recorder, pausing frequently to make sure he was actually saying what he thought he was saying. Recommendation: immediate reclassification of Homo sapiens from death world survivors to psychologically incomprehensible, suggested threat level, handle with extreme caution and possibly therapy. Meanwhile, Jake had somehow turned the remainder of the class period into what could only be described as Earth's greatest horror hits. He was currently explaining the plot of something called the Blair Witch Project, while half the class took notes and the other half questioned their life choices. So they get lost in the woods, right? But here's the genius part. You never actually see the monster. The entire movie is just people getting increasingly paranoid and yelling at each other while filming themselves with handheld cameras. We convinced audiences to pay money to watch people have nervous breakdowns in real time. Professor Zelnoth, who had arrived halfway through Jake's impromptu lecture, was frantically taking notes. Fascinating. So you've discovered that unknown threats are more psychologically disturbing than visible ones? Exactly. We call it psychological horror. The scariest monster is the one in your imagination because your brain will always come up with something worse than what anyone could put on screen. Quin'dal, who had given up trying to operate the fear induction equipment and was now just openly fascinated, raised a tentacle. But what about your haunted house attractions? Those seem to combine both visible and psychological elements. Jake's eyes lit up. Oh, you want to know about haunted houses? Okay, so picture this. We build these elaborate mazes filled with actors whose job is to hide in dark corners and jump out at paying customers. People literally line up for hours and pay money to walk through these places while strangers chase them with fake chainsaws. The silence that followed was profound enough that you could probably have heard a pin drop on the other side of the space station. Commander Vex'tar looked up from his report with an expression of dawning horror. Chainsaws, he repeated slowly. Mechanical cutting devices, for entertainment purposes. Well, fake ones, Jake clarified helpfully. Although some of the really hardcore haunted houses use real chainsaws with the chains removed, for authenticity. It was at this moment that Commander Vex'tar achieved what psychologists would later classify as a breakthrough understanding of human psychology. Which is to say, he gave up entirely and accepted that some things in the universe were simply beyond rational comprehension. You know what? He announced, standing up and straightening his ceremonial cape. I'm reassigning myself to a nice, quiet desk job cataloging the migration patterns of space butterflies. Quin'dal, you're in charge of the Human Integration Program. Sir? Quin'dal's three heads swiveled to track his commander with alarm. Congratulations, Jake Martinez of Earth, Vex'tar continued, now backing toward the door with the careful movements of someone who'd realized they were in over their head. You are hereby appointed as Special Consultant for Human Psychological Warfare. Your first assignment is to explain to the Galactic Education Authority why your species invented something called extreme sports, and why anyone thought that was a good idea. Jake grinned and gave a casual salute. Thanks, Commander. This should be fun. Hey, has anyone here ever heard of something called free solo rock climbing? Because wait until you hear about that. The door sealed behind Commander Vex'tar with the decisive sound of someone who had decided that some mysteries were better left unsolved. The last thing anyone heard from him was a faint muttering about early retirement and possibly switching to a career in something safe and predictable, like diffusing quantum explosives. Meanwhile, Jake was already planning Nebula Academy's first annual human horror movie marathon, complete with popcorn, candy, and a carefully curated selection of films designed to prove that humanity's relationship with fear was both completely insane and absolutely brilliant. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Galactic Education Authority received a report that would fundamentally change how the galaxy viewed one small blue planet and its remarkably twisted inhabitants.